What's up, guys? It's a Vigilant Texan here, coming back to finish up the train of thought that I finished off the last video with. Hope you guys are all having a good day. Hope you had a great Passover and began your Feast of Unleavened Breads. You've got all the leavened bread out of your dwellings. If you're celebrating it this week, I do understand that there are some people on different calendars that it's going to be next week. If so, I pray that that goes well for you. I don't know, to me the calendar, it's like the one I use the luni-solar calendar, which World's Last Chance has an app that you can get on your phone that'll show you, and it's just based on the sun and moon, which I believe we're supposed to. And at any rate, on that calendar, Passover was Friday night. And anyway, hope you watched the last video. I did not eat lamb for Passover, and I hope that you didn't either. I hope you don't eat any meat ever, or kill any animals. That's my position. And you know, touched on a lot of things in the last video, and I felt like I kind of had to rush through it. I felt like the quality wasn't that great. I feel like the enemy is really trying to prevent me from getting these videos out and from letting anyone see them. When I posted it on a couple of social media places, it felt like it probably just got, like, Facebook or whoever just decided to, you know, not put it in people's feeds. I didn't get nearly the reaction I was hoping for, but that's fine. Also didn't really like the quality of the last video. I did it in my living room and my dogs were making noise, and but man, I just felt like I needed to get it out before Passover. No worries though. Today I'm actually in my garage. If you follow me on Instagram, you know what car this is, my baby. But I feel like this quality is going to be a lot better today. The reason why we're in the garage, obviously, I'm just moving into this new house and I'm having some painting and remodeling done. Eventually though, I'm going to have a room, kind of a spot dedicated just for making these videos. Even got me a bookshelf. I'm going to try to do like every other YouTube scholar and have a bunch of cool books behind me or whatever. But for now, just got to get these messages out. And today the message is what's pagan, what's satanic, what does occult ritual animal sacrifice look like, and is it just like what they snuck into Leviticus? Because basically, you know, this all stems from the sacrificial system being snuck in there in and around the Babylonian captivity. You know, the Jewish rabbis themselves admit to that being the time when those things were put in, and that they took the reforms of Josiah and the workings of Ezra and the other priests while they were in Babylon and inserted the sacrificial system, which included the killing of animals and the bringing of animals in for sacrifices to the Most High, just like, as I'm going to show you, they were being sacrificed in the pagan temples. And basically, I feel like if I can prove that the very most evil and satanic priesthoods that have ever been, and the most admitted, like, occult mysticists, you know, Satan worshiping whatever, like, we're going to look at some Hittite rituals, some Canaanites, we're going to look at some of the Greek, I believe, and then I can show you if this is what they're doing and this is straight out of their manuscripts. Like, do you really think that our Elohim wants to be worshipped the same way those heathens are? Okay. And the other thing is, you know, you can think back and remember the story. It was the fallen angels that fell and had the giant, the Nephilim, who then began to eat and devour animals and humans, and that's where the idea of this being able to eat the lesser animals came into being. And those Nephilim, who were worshipped as gods, who wanted to be set themselves up just like the Most High. Many of them built pyramids where they were at the top, just like I believe in heaven, where Abba sits up above Polaris. And but these gods or whatever, they required sacrifice. They were actually hungry. They would eat many things, you know. That's where this came from, that undeniable hunger, an unquenchable thirst, the Bible describes it, that these Nephilim have for fleshly desires, okay? Well, our Elohim doesn't have those desires. You know, if you think about Psalms 50, let me skip to the end kind of for a sec. You think about Psalms 50, you know, our Elohim says, you know, what do I need the blood of bulls or goats? You know, do I need I didn't have it in there. Do I need a cow's blood? You know, I own every animal in the land. You know, I don't need you to bring me animals. Every animal in the field is mine, just to kind of paraphrase. But these gods did. They desired blood. They drank the blood. You know, it's the difference between, all the way back to the garden, the tree of life and the tree of good and evil, you know. One way is life, the other way is death. You consume life, you will live, and live more abundantly. You consume death, you will slowly die and be smited with plagues. But anyway, let's examine the evidence that catalogs similar practices. The first thing that I'd like to mention here, the first example is showing that the Neo-Babylonian Empire that captured the Yahudim, or the priests, Israelite priests, already had this culture that was centered around temple worship and the economy running through the priesthood, all done in the name of religion in service to their gods, by killing innocent animals and slaughtering them to idols and keeping the best for themselves and having festivals at the temples. This was the culture that they were in not only Babylon, but everywhere. All of the neighboring countries had this temple system. Babylon just had the most efficient, so to speak. They were kind of the best at it, you know what I mean, at the time. Of course, empires rise and fall, but we're focusing in on the time when the Israelites went into exile, which would have been the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So this is actually just from Wikipedia, just well-known facts that are published from archaeological digs about the Neo-Babylonian Empire at the time, and this is their economy. The section about their economy says, the establishment of the Neo-Babylonian Empire meant that for the first time since the Assyrian conquest, tribute flowed into Babylon rather than being drained from it. This reversal combined the building projects and the relocation subjugation of peoples, stimulated both population and economic growth in the region. So as Babylon became more powerful, people began to have to pay tribute to them instead of the other way around. People were subjugated and enslaved to them, and so they quickly came up with this temple system. But we'll just keep reading here what it says. Although the soil of Mesopotamia was fertile, the average rainfall in the region was not enough to sustain regular crops. As such, water had to be drawn from two major rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, for use in irrigation. These rivers tended to flood at inconvenient times, such as grain harvest time. To solve these issues and allow for efficient farming, Mesopotamia required a sophisticated large-scale system of canals, dams, and dikes, both to protect from floods and to supply water. These structures required constant maintenance and supervision to function. Digging and maintaining the canals was seen as a royal task, and resources required to construct and maintain the infrastructure necessary and the manpower itself was provided by the many temples which dotted the region. So, in order to farm, it was difficult, but the workers for the farms came from the temples. Everything ran through the temple. The priests were in charge. Okay. The most detailed economic records we have from Neo-Babylonian times are from the temples. The people who cultivated the temple lands of Babylon were mostly unfree personnel, so-called temple dependents, or siraku, which were usually given larger work assignments than they could accomplish. In later times, to increase productivity, the temples began hiring rent farmers. These rent farmers were given a portion of all the temple's farming grounds and fields, including the temple dependents and equipment there, in exchange for money and fixed quota of commodities to supply the temple. Rent farmers were personally liable for accidents and falling short of the quota. Many records of rent farmers giving up or sometimes being required to sell their own possessions and assets to the temple for compensation. Okay. Now, animal husbandry. Although animal husbandry was practiced throughout Mesopotamia, it was the most common form of farming in the south, or Uruk. Animals, rather than some type of plant, were the main cash crop. Boom. And the temples ran it all. Shepherds could be temple dependents or independent contractors, and were entrusted with herds of either sheep or goats. Similar to the other farmers working in connection to the temples, these shepherds had a set quota of lambs to provide for sacrificial purposes. The wool and hides also being used in temples for various purposes. Dairy products were less important since the animals were unavailable for most of the year. Cows and oxen were rare in Mesopotamia due to being difficult to feed and maintain throughout the summer months. They were mainly used as draft animals for plowing regions with swampy environments, unsuited for farming. So, when the priests, the Israelite priests, get over there to Babylon, okay, they've been having enough problems of their own with their own temples. You can go back and read during Judges how many times they brought in pagan rituals into the temple in Israel, how many times from one leader who would be for Yah and would tear down the idols and get rid of the orgies and take away the animal sacrifices and go back to the right way. And then later in another chapter, Judges, the next in line would take over and bring in all the false gods. There were even people in there with Baal in their name. So they could never really get it figured out there in Israel. Basically, they weren't doing it right, and they weren't doing it wrong the right way either, because they weren't prosperous. Now, part of that was because Abba didn't want them to prosper, obviously. But then they get over here to Babylon, and they're like, man, these priests got it going over here. Every single thing that goes on runs through these priests, and they have total control over the whole population. People are having to bring their animals in, and I believe that they wanted to bring that prosperity back to Jerusalem. And when they did and built the second temple, there was sort of more prosperous time, I guess, than the first temple. And like we were mentioning in the last time, the law that they brought back, at least it didn't allow for any orgies, and certain animals that were unclean weren't allowed to be sacrificed anymore. So in the eyes of the Israelites at the time, it felt like an improvement. But from the eyes of what we know now, and from a perspective that it's not okay to kill and eat, then it definitely was not good. And in fact, it was so bad that Abba finally had to send his own son to take care of it. Now we're going to skip around a little bit and examine the evil rituals. This is a quote from Mamba Chitatan, some occult leader. Mambo Chitatan, Soyeti Fosfoyowi, Haitian Voodoo. Haitian. Her quote says, "We do not offer human blood in Haitian Voodoo, despite stereotypes to the contrary. Blood can be offered in rituals around making animal offerings, which almost always become food for ritual participants. Once the spirits have taken their share, it is possible to consider sacrifice in the sense of other offerings of great worth that are given to the spirits, such as great amounts of effort, money, resources, and time to an entire Vodou Sayase will dedicate to initiational ceremonies or annual observances of special rituals, but we still do not place these offerings as being more precious or higher than the ultimate sacrifice of an animal's life to provide protection, blessing, and sustenance. So there you go. These occult people still sack animals today. And notice how she says, once the spirits have taken their share, so they actually believe that the spirits, or that the gods are partaking of the animals. This is from Occult World. Just, you go to the Occult World and just look at their, like, dictionary, I guess you could say. This is like their definition of sacrifice, and it says, an offering of a gift, especially to a deity or being, in petition, thanksgiving, or appeasement. The most common offerings are food, drink, the fruits of harvest, and the blood sacrifice of animals and fowl. The highest sacrifice is that of human life, a practice now rare. Sacrifices can be made to elements, the sun and moon, the cardinal points, sacred landmarks, mountains, lakes, rivers, and so on, the dead and supernatural beings. In contemporary witchcraft and paganism, offerings can be cakes, drinks, fruits, flowers, poems, handcraft, incense, nuts, and other items. Blood sacrifice is considered unnecessary for worship in witchcraft rituals. An offering of food and drink is presented at the altar or sprinkled about the outdoors as an offering. But then they go on and have another section on blood sacrifice. Excuse me. Ritual blood sacrifice is an ancient custom of propagation to the gods. Animals, fowls, and humans have long been sacrificed in various religious rites to secure bountiful harvests and secure blessing and protection from deities. Blood consumed in ritual blood sacrifice is believed to give the drinkers the soul and attributes of the blood of the deceased, whether it be human or animal. The Celts and Druids reportedly drank the blood of their sacrificed human victims. Aztecs cut out the hearts of their human sacrifices with flint knives. The still beating heart was held aloft by the priest, then placed on a ceremonial receptacle. The body is often dismembered and eaten in an act of ritual cannibalism. The Koms of southern India impaled their victims on stakes and then cut off pieces of their backs to fertilize the soil. Whoa. And that one with the Aztecs, I swear, was it a Indiana Jones movie where they showed that being done? I could have sworn. Maybe. I saw it in a movie. The sacrifice of the firstborn children was once a common custom in various cultures, particularly in times of trouble. During the Punic Wars, the nobility of Carthage, which was the Canaanites, sacrificed hundreds of children to Baal by rolling them into pits of fire. Carthage, the Carthaginians, the Phoenicians were Canaanites. That's just, they kept changing their name. There's an altar there. Pagan one, where they would do their killings. During the witch hunts, witches were said to sacrifice cocks and unbaptized children to the devil. They also were charged with cannibalism of infants and children. The cock sacrifices most likely relate to pagan custom of sacrificing cocks as the corn spirit in harvest festivals or in folk magic spells, or in order to ensure an abundant crop the following year. Like Baal, the god of, bounty and good weather, whatever. The accusation of sacrifice and cannibalism of children were most likely a result of torture applied during inquisitions and trials of accused witches. It also in keeping with historical trends of similar accusations leveled by one religious group against another. The Syrians accused the Jews of human sacrifice and cannibalism, much as the Romans accused the Christians, and Christians accused the Gnostics, Cathars, Waldeans, Aborigines. The reason why it's so common to accuse them of, it's because it was happening everywhere. It wasn't until Messiah came and made his final sacrifice that, it was not immediately, but then, eventually there is a time now, like we live in a time now where there aren't animals openly being sacrificed in temples, and that's because the Messiah succeeded. He stopped the animal sacrifices in the Jewish temple, the temple of Elohim, and because of that, I believe, it eventually caused a ripple effect when the Roman Empire decided to take on Christianity, and they did their little editing up of a few things. Even though it was a meat-eating Christianity where they still ate meat at their festivals, they no longer sacrificed in the temple as part of, you know, their customs. And it was because many of the Jewish temples at the time, who were ran by the Pharisees and Sadducees, refused to give up their animal sacrificing ways. It's kind of a part of what caused the schism between there. And you know, anyway, go down a rabbit trail here. In magic, blood sacrifice releases a flash power which the magician uses for a spell or conjuration. The old grimoires called for killing animals and using their skins to make parchment, used in drawing the magical symbols needed. Animals offered should be young, healthy, and virgin for the maximum release of energy. Sound familiar? The letting of blood and the fear and death throes of the victim add to the frenzy of the magician. Aleister Crowley, in his book Magic in Theory and Practice, 1929, said that the ethics of the thing appear to have concerned no one, nor to tell the truth need they do so. Crowley sacrificed animals and fowls in his rituals within a magic circle or triangle, which prevented the energy from escaping. He considered the torturing of the animal first in order to obtain an elemental slave, an indefensible, utterly black magic of the very worst kind, although in the next breath he said that he had no objection to such black magic if it was properly understood. Crowley also noted that a magician could effect a blood sacrifice without the loss of life by gashing himself or an assistant. Animals sacrificed in various tribal rituals in the Voodoo and Santeria. The animal sacrifices of Santeria, usually fowl, sometimes lambs or goats, have raised much opposition in America from animal rights groups and offended individuals who consider the custom barbaric. The issue has been exacerbated by the practice of some Santerias of leaving their beheaded and mutilated sacrifices in public places for others to find. Charges of stealing pet dogs and cats for sacrifices have also been levied against the groups. Santerians in the U.S. counter that with the Constitution protects their right to worship as they see fit. They defend animal sacrifice by pointing to its ancient roots. So those are the only two groups that still do it today. They're not very often publicized. And there's no way our Creator wanted this. There's a reason it's hard for you to look at that. Okay, it's called the Holy Spirit, right? Abba wrote his laws on our heart. Every human being deep down can feel what's right and wrong. And there's no way you can look at that and tell me that's right. If you don't look at that and feel sadness and shock, then you don't have the Holy Spirit in you. Sorry. The Ruach HaKodesh knows what's clean and what's unclean. And then killing something and eating something that has blood in it. You know, think about this. When you sweat, how do you think that sweat gets to your pores? How do you think that your body gets that sweat to its pores? It's like a cow. A cow gets all sweaty. Well, that secretion is shedding off, right? How do you think that those things get out? So anything that has blood in it, anything that bleeds, inside of those veins is stuff that's trying to get expelled from the body. So it's impossible for you to consume something that's flesh that's ever had blood in it without also consuming those toxins that were not meant to be eaten. And in return, you're gonna the effects of it are taxing on your body. If you eat a diet that's high in animal proteins and flesh and cheese and dairy, you're gonna start showing the signs of it probably in your 20s and 30s. But boy, by the time you get to 40s, some very serious health problems are waiting for you with clogged arteries, probably diabetes, puffy skin. Your skin's going to be in bad shape. You're probably going to have a lot of extra fat hanging out around your body. It's going to be hard to... It's just not good. Not only does science prove it, but, you know, it's, to me, it's everywhere. It's very evident. But let's keep looking at these, because what you're going to find here is some of these little rituals were clearly just adopted and put in to Leviticus. They try to do it in a cleaner, more spiritual way, but you just, as long as you're killing animals, it's bad. Sacrifice and magic. Blood sacrifice releases a flash of power which the magician uses for an evocation or calling of the spirit. The old Gimerites called for killing animals, usually a young goat, in advanced ceremony, using their skins to make parchment, drawing the magical symbols needed. I already read that, I'm so sorry. The Gimorium Varium specifies that the magician should cut the throat of a virgin kid goat with a single slash of his magical knife. Oh, actually, no, I didn't read that. It's a little different in this version. It says the offering should be a healthy young virgin for the maximum release of energy. Yeah, but then check this part out. Sometimes the sacrifice is best performed at the peak of the ritual. The letting of blood and the fear and death throes of the victim add to the frenzy of the musician. The fumes of the sacrificial blood also enable the evoked spirit to become visible to the musician, the magician. Ooh, creepy. I slay thee in the name and honor of some spirit of deity. Oh. The Gimorium Varium. A slash of its throat with a magical knife while you say the deity's name. According to the Key of Solomon, white animals should be sacrificed to benevolent spirits, and black animals should be sacrificed to evil spirits. The magician should cut off the entire head of the animal with a single blow while saying, "O high and powerful being, may this sacrifice be pleasing and acceptable to thee. Serve us faithfully, and better sacrifice shall be given thee." Another version of the key give this incantation: "I, blank, slay thee, blank, in the name of, to honor the blank." I'm not saying these names because I don't want to invoke any evilness into this video, but you get the idea. According to Eliphas Levi, who started the Satanic Church, when the Grimoire spoke of killing a kid goat, they meant that a human child should be sacrificed. This is not likely, though records exist of human sacrifice in efforts to obtain something by magical means. For example, in 1841, treasure hunters in Italy sacrificed a boy to a demon in hopes of being led to a buried treasure. Eliphas Levi said that he thinks when they say a kid goat, they just mean a kid, and that was like their secret way of saying a child without, being persecuted for killing. Crowley also said that a male child of perfect innocence and high intelligence is the most satisfactory and perfect victim. His claim to performing such a sacrifice on average of 150 times a year between 1921 and 1928 is doubtful, however. I don't know, man, if he said he was doing it. Now, this is from a book called Similarities Between Leviticus and Canaanite Religion. I'll leave some links at the end. So, sacrificial offerings. Many urban temples and rural shrines have been excavated throughout Canaan, and the Ugaritic texts, as well as the Bible, are especially helpful to study of religious behavior. They display significant similarities, even though they were composed centuries apart and opposite geographical ends of Canaan. This overlap suggests a commonality of religious culture from Bronze Age throughout the land of Canaan. Nevertheless, there are some interesting minor distinctions. For example, the Bible stresses blood as the source of life, but Ugaritic ritual texts do not. Well, yeah, they're trying to set up, it's the Ugaritic text of the Canaanite and Hittite ritual is just what they did when the priests in Babylon tried to adopt those rituals and bring them into the temple of Yah. They cleaned them up a little bit and focused on a few different things, but as you can see, it's going to sound like they're coming straight from the same place. In the ancient world, temples existed primarily to receive and process food offerings. The temples also stored the king's wealth and served as rudimentary bank, but from the perspective of the commoners who never saw that well. The sacrificial activities were the primary events of any temple. Some offerings were voluntary, most often than not. However, the offerings were taxed. The taxes owed to the god and the priests who represented the king and his bureaucracy. So there you go. It's exactly what it sounds like they were doing in Israel. A Ugarit record suggests that the temples controlled much of the agricultural economy, the tax system, organized as ritual offerings. So the regulation and distribution of meat, cereal, wine, oil, cloth, metal, incense, like all the things of the temple, like he said, becomes a den of thieves. It gets to where you guys are bringing in all these taxes and so-called offerings for God. The priests are making out like bandits and ripping everybody off, and charging usury. Often incense, rotate, and figurines and other handcrafted items, idols. So also they made money off of the selling of idols. Fragmentary evidence from other sites shows similar economic control exerted on temples. Bronze Age Lachish, for example, inscriptions on bowls designate their contents as harvest tax. The other Ugaritic text records it as a receipt for Baal. Oh, did you get your receipt from Baal? I brought my offerings to Baal. Can I get my receipt? These taxes were paid in kind, or animals, not coin, which hadn't been invented yet. The offerings can be identified by chemical analysis of residue on altar surfaces and in storage jars. They included wheat, barley, grapes, olives, the primary crops of the region, wheat and barley. So the oil for the lamps, stuff to make soap, grapes, everything. Almost all domestic animals were sacrificed at a temple by priests as part of their religious ritual. This is in Canaanite, Hittite religion, straight out of these Ugarit texts. Some of the meat was offered to the god on Thanksgiving, but most was consumed by the people and very little was wasted. Large quantities of meat were consumed by the upper classes, which included the priests. The average peasant ate mostly only usually at festival times. The portions of meat sacrifice offered to God differed from place to place, and sometimes differed according to the type of sacrifice that was offered. Analysis of the temple trash in the Bronze Age Lachish and Iron Age temples on the slopes of Mount Carmel suggests that in many cases, the right four-legged animal was God's portion, which would match what Leviticus said. The temple's altar, usually quite large and located in an open-air courtyard, commoners rarely or never entered the temple building, which was the priest's special privilege, but they could witness the altar sacrifices and the ceremonies associated with it. If hymns were sung as part of these rituals, as suggested by the figurines with musical instruments, remember, the people sat down to eat and rose up to play golden calf. These songs and any processionals or dances probably took place in the courtyard. A peasant who brought an animal for sacrifice could only watch the sacrifice and receive, in the end, some roasted meat. The priests get all the good stuff. They're taking it to the back, hiding it in the temple. You can imagine why there was some of those priests that were so huge and fat. I mean, because they're saying that they have to do these daily offerings. So every day, big fresh lamb chops and steaks. No wonder some of those priests were so fat and evil and blind, as Enoch said, they were all blind. Paying taxes was just one of the reasons for sacrificing to the gods. Most Canaanites also believed the sacrifices fed and clothed their gods. The Bible refers to offerings as food for the biblical gods, Leviticus 3:11, and there's an ancient evidence to suggest that clothing was draped over divine images. For example, the Bible narrates this religious innovations of King Josiah, such as the destruction of the compartments of the holy ones, which were in the temple of Yah, where the women wore garments for Asherah. So they're talking about what they're saying there is that it also took place before the captivity, before King Josiah's reforms. They were already worshiping the evil gods sacrificing to Baal and other gods and having orgies in the temple. All that stuff was going on during the first temple. And the only difference when they brought back the new law from the exile was that now they thought they had cleaned it all up, but really they got blinded by the Babylonian mysticism. Got tricked into writing the Talmud, I believe. Anyway, keep going here. At a deeper theological level, these sacrifices has additional meaning. Comparison of the Ugarit ritual text and the Bible illustrates this deeper level. The Bible speaks of an autumn festival at 3 stages. First, celebration of the new year, Rosh Hashanah. A second, day of repentance for sin, divine forgiveness, and then animal sacrifice, Yom Kippur. And third, a week of celebration for the grape harvest, Tabernacles. These rites, described in Leviticus 23 and elsewhere, were given religious meaning by relating the rituals to the legend of Moses and Exodus from Egypt, but their agricultural foundation is evident. Together they constitute a fall harvest celebration, and each portion of the celebration finds its counterpart in Ugarit. The city's week-long harvest festival is similar to Tabernacles, preceded a New Year observance that involved a ritual for well-being for the Ugarit people in which human sin was atoned and ritual sacrifices offered, very similar to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So what they're trying to say here is that they had these very similar holidays, festivals, okay, but they were not exactly in the same order and on the same days. This is why you see Abba in the prophets and the Psalms saying, I don't like your festivals, you know, I don't enjoy your songs and melodies, because they had to, not only were they sacrificing animals, but they had the times confused. They weren't doing it. And you know, man, I have a tough time with it. You know, I want to honor Abba, obviously, and I love the Shabbat, of course. It's my favorite day of the week. But you know, were the appointed times, you know, brought in during the sacrificial system as well? Can we trust those? You know, the Feast of Tabernacles, I want to say we keep for sure, because it actually started long before any of that, when they were coming, when Jacob was had to camp out with all of his progeny and sleep in booths when he was being chased by Laban. That's when that started. So I believe because it had innocent beginnings that we should do it. Plus, you know, to be commanded to have a week of camping and celebration and save up your money, and it feels right to me. Anyway, relationships between people and their God were fundamental meaning in most common sacrifices, and at the Ugarit, evaluation of ritual text demonstrates that 2 sacrifices were far more common than all others combined. Of these 2, one accounts for 5 times more animal sacrifice than the other, and thus accounted for the overwhelming majority of all animal sacrifices. This most common sacrifice was a peace offering. The second most common was the burnt offering. The peace offering was, in essence, a fellowship dinner. The animal was sacrificed and a portion offered to the gods, while the bulk of the meat was consumed by the worshippers. The name of the offering implies its meaning. It creates peace among worshippers and between the worshipper and their God. This word peace meant more than the absence of strife. It designated wholeness and well-being for the community. The burnt offering was an animal that was given entirely to the god with no meat remaining for the human participants. It was wholly burnt, transforming it into smoke that rose up to the god's abode. This type of offering represented food for the gods, but it was also for thanksgiving or for blessing. And here are some of the current synagogue of Satan doing their dirty things over there in Israel. Now here I'm going to show you that there was a similar practice in Norse religion. Heimskringla, some type of writing they found, contains one of the best survived records of animal sacrifice in Northern Europe. The Hakon, the good, Snorre Sturlason writes, Sigurd, the Jarl of Lade, was a great sacrificer, and so had been Hakon his father. Sigurd and Jarl upheld all the blood offerings for Trondlal, the king, on the king's behalf. It was an old custom when they made an offering for all the bonders to come to the temple and bring their eatables, which they would need as long as the offering lasted. There they also slew all kinds of cattle and horses, and all the blood which flowed from them was called lauk. The bowls in which the blood stood was called lauk bowls, and lauktinir, which were made like a sprinkler. With all this, they should stain the stalls red, and likewise the temple was inside and out, likewise sprinkled on it all the men. The flesh was cooked as meat for the guest feast. There should be fires in the midst of the temple floor, and moreover should hang kettles. They should carry bowls to the fire of he who was making the offering, and there was a chief should bless the bowl of all the flesh, but he should first bless Odin's bowl, which should be drunk for the king's victory and power, and afterward the bowls of Njord and Frey for good seasons and peace. And you think about how they were sprinkling the blood all over things. Doesn't that just sound exactly like Leviticus when they're telling them to splash some of the blood on the altar and splash the blood? My goodness, we're not even supposed to kill anything that bleeds, much less take. Can you imagine if, we got, when Cain killed Abel, it said his blood cried out. It was terrible that his blood, he actually came out of him and hit the ground. Something that made God sad, and then here these people are just, oh my God. Alright, now we're going to get into Hittite ritual. This Hittite religion was mentioned in cuneiform tablets unearthed during the excavation of Hattusa in 1989, so this is a recent find. When farmers found the clay tablets while plowing his field, then the excavation at the site began. Following year in 1990, on behalf of Ankara University, the site has yielded an archive of 4,000 tablets and tablet fragments dating back to the beginning of the 14th century BCE. Okay, they were all Hittite, and this is the Hittite. What they found on the tablets. Sorry, somebody tried to call me out and look over. Anyway, what they found on these tablets was detailed descriptions of Hittite rituals, and the Hittites, of course, mentioned alongside the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Canaanites, like the bad ones, the very worst tribes that were against the Israelites. Okay, let's read through here a little bit. Although a Hittite ritual handbook cannot yet be written, clear patterns relating to the appropriate use of animals in ritual have emerged from the text. These are dependent almost entirely on animal symbolic power. The deeper range of symbolic values, its greater range of uses in ritual sacrifice and magic. Okay? Regular offerings. Blood sacrifice, whether for divination, meal sharing, or soliciting divine aid, formed the core of Hittite ritual, so the blood sacrifice was the main one. Primary means of communicating with the gods. Animal sacrifice in the official state religion of Hittite Anatolia virtually always involved domestic livestock, primarily sheep, less of 10 goats, and on important occasions, cattle. Normal sacrifice concerns the official regular attendance and sustenance to the gods. Sounds familiar. In Hittite ritual, this involved the daily preparation of ritual meals punctuated by monthly and seasonal festivals. Wild animals did not participate in such normal or regular sacrifices, since they were not desirable sustenance for the god. Occasionally reference to ritual consecration or dedication of a wild animal, deer, eagle, falcon, to a deity suggests their symbolic importance, but not evident that they were sacrificed. When wild animals or pets, dogs and pigs, were killed or eaten in ritual, the purpose was not to feed the gods, but to serve some other more specialized function, such as purification. Typically, in ritual sacrifice, the victim was brought to the sacrificial altar within the temple in a procession involving singers and musicians, cooks, priests, and then the sacrificer and other participants. The animal victim had to be of fine quality, healthy, be purified and consecrated prior to the kill. Often the color of the animal was specified depending on the nature of the deity in whose honor it was being offered up. Similar thing, remind you of the red heifer. The animal was dedicated to the deity, then its throat was slit in participants made noise to attract the attention of the deity. The animal was butchered on the spot and the meat taken away for preparation by the temple chefs. This repast, usually a meat stew, was set before the deity and the human guests who, in sharing the meal, reaffirmed their relationship with the divine. So, man, sounds just like Leviticus. Burnt offerings at home in the human milieu, southeastern Anatolian and northern Syria, birds were the most frequent victims in such sacrifices. Although young animals, lambs and kids, might also be offered in this manner, the birds were killed as offerings to the gods of the underworld, either explicitly or implicitly. The exorcist offers 1 lamb and 8 birds to the Anunnaki deities. On 3 hearths he burns them together with the flat breads, cedar, oil, and honey, and libates wine and recites the incantation. Earlier in this ritual to purge a house of sin, the officiant relates to a mythological and theology. For the offering, he says, he takes 3 birds and offers 2 of them to the Anunnaki deities, but the other bird he offers to the pit, and he says, for you, O primordial deities, cattle and sheep will not be forthcoming. When the storm god drove you down to the dark underworld, he established this for you. Blood offerings also introduced into Hittite cult by the Canaanites. So the Hittites were directly influenced by the Canaanites, which were, of course, the worst of the worst. Involved in the sacrifice of birds, sheep, goats, whose blood was smeared all over the sacred place. Piece of cultic furniture, ritual pit, or divine statue. The animal was then burned. The state's purpose of the practice was purification. They take the 2 daggers that were made along with the statue of the new deity with them, dig a ritual pit for the deity in front of the table. Then they offer 1 sheep to the deity for each sacrifice, to downward in the hole. Then they bloody the golden image of the deity, the wall, and the implements of the new deity. So they're sprinkling the blood around. It sounds like it's straight out of Leviticus. Then the new deity and the temple are pure, and the sheep is burned up. No one eats it, however, for the symbolism of the smeared blood. We may need to look at the blood of birth, since the ritual consists of the installation of the satellite temple for the goddess of night. The blood anoints the goddess reborn, suggests such symbolism for the blood present in them is a ritual. Apatronic fertility purification rituals are specializations performed to address a specific problem, such as removing impurity, counteracting sorcery, and protecting newborns. Initiation and appeasement rituals also might involve animals in such rituals. Wild and domestic animals alike were manipulated in a variety of ways to effect the desired result. Such magic rituals were complex and employed traditional methods, proven techniques that formed a ritual bag of tricks that the practitioners of the rites could draw upon to address any situation. Among the techniques employed were encircling, whirling, severing, sprinkling, analogy, substitution, techniques combined with function and material to form a complex ritual matrix of overlapping and sometimes seemingly redundant elements in which endless combinations might be possible. So they're talking about how these priests had all these different magic rites they could perform with different animals, using different things, even sometimes dog excrement, animal heads, often burned, other body parts in particular. A lot of gross stuff here. I'm just going to kind of skim through. And the reason why there's so many typos and misspellings in this little section here is because the only way I find this information was a book that was written on it, and it came from a PDF. And when I tried to copy and paste, like, I don't know, man, this is the best way it copied in, and I didn't feel like going through there and trying to fix every little misspelling and the way it came in. Anyway, there's a part in here that I would really like to. Yeah. Here we go. Even the soil turned up by ants had magical properties, and devour the sheep, let the birds, foxes devour the strength, the evil man. Okay, here we go. The ram mounts the ewe and becomes pregnant. Let this town and house become a ram, and in the steppe let the mountain the dark earth, and let the dark earth become pregnant with blood and pollution. The dog not get along with the pig, just as the single pig gives birth to many piglets. Let every single branch bear many clusters. Dogs and pigs and unclean animals were especially suitable for material for purifications. So what they're saying is they used the unclean animals to try to purify the temple. And then, the Babylonian Jewish Israelite priests who brought back their law, they thought they were cleaning it up and making it better by not using any unclean animals, not realizing because they were so hooked on eating meat, even though they thought it was clean meat, that their eyes were blinded, and really there was not supposed to be any killing and eating in the temple. One ritual performed of particular interest involved cutting a puppy in half. Now this is good. This is interesting here. Cutting the puppy in half, sometimes along with a piglet or goat. So they cut the 3 animals in halves. Then the 2 halves are placed on either side of a gate, and the participants in the ritual pass between the 2 halves, which absorbs the evil. Now, what I'm thinking is this is exactly the mystical occult practice that they decided to ascribe to Abraham when he makes his covenant with Yah, and Yah says take a dove and slice it in half, take a lamb and slice it in half, and go between the 2 halves, right? That they were trying to make Abraham sound as if he was practicing these occult practices, which are right here in the Hittite ritual, which came from the Canaanites. So since those priests had their hands on the Tanakh right there in the Babylonian exile, they went back in there, I believe, and added in little spots where the patriarchs were sacrificing and offerings to Abba, when those parts of the story were never in there. It's just that since they were going to bring all this into the temple, they figured, hey, why not? Let's throw it in here a little. Let's have Abraham prepare a meal for these guests that includes, a kid. Let's have Jacob, and Rachel be okay with preparing a kid for Isaac, when that never would have been the case. You know what I'm saying? Now we're going to talk about the Hittite scapegoat ritual, which most clearly resembles Leviticus 16. Okay. It was designed to end plagues brought on by the enemy. The Pulisa ritual, a ram and a ewe were decorated with colored strands of wool formed in a wreath. The wool strands were pulled from the mouth of the king, symbolized the misfortune afflicting him, and by extension his dying troops. Having received the impurity, the animals are then sent out on the road into the enemy's territory to return the plagues to its source. For a comparison with the biblical scapegoat rite, a more unusual scapegoat is found in Ambezi's ritual. When the rodent is offered to the gods as food in this ritual, the offering is not intended the same way a regular sacrifice, but combined with the purification by the scapegoat, directed to dangerous deities to secure their well-being towards the patient. She, the official, wraps a small piece of tin in a bowstring. She wraps it around the patient's right hand and foot, then takes it away from them and transfers it to the rodent. Says, I have taken away the evil, transferred it to the rodent. Now, you compare that to the, I guess it's Yom Kippur ritual, where it says, they take Azazel the goat and they send him off into the wilderness. Then this, in this other ritual that's described, a billy goat is sacrificed to seal an oath taken to Santas and the Enowadis deities who are responsible for a current misfortune. It is not a normal sacrifice to seal the oath. The participant must take a bite of the goat's liver and sip its blood through a straw. After the gods have had their fill of the repast, thereby agreeing to witness the oath, 9 boys are brought in. One dresses in a goat skin and howls like a wolf. The youth then devour what is left of the goat sacrifice, including the liver and heart. Gross. Ugh. So right alongside the one that sounds like it comes from Leviticus, you have this evil, terrible practices. And man, you know, pause the video and read this screen if you like. I'm not going to read it aloud. You read it. If the most evil, satanic, pagan, occult, ritual, animal sacrifices are going on in the most evil temples dedicated to fallen angels or demons or Baal or, you know, Marduk or whoever the evil deities are, if that's what's going on in their temples, do you really think Elohim wants that to go on in his temple? Do you really think? Do you really think? I don't think so. Let me read, let me finish off with a little bit from the last teaching. I could have sworn I had, sorry, this is going to take a little second for this to load here. I could have sworn I had a couple of these verses moved over to the other note, but obviously not. As you can see, man, the enemy did not want me to get this video out today. Man, I've been having computer problems for like an hour and a half before I finally got this thing to pull up and start working. Like I had to load a bunch of drivers in, and then the sound card wasn't working, and then I was having trouble getting everything moved out here to the garage. And then, I mean, I could have put this video out a couple days ago, but it's like every time I turn around, something is preventing me from being able to get this information out to the people. But no worries, guys. Eventually I'll get my room set up and I'll re-record Man Was Not Designed to Eat Animals in a much nicer environment without as many distractions. And who knows, maybe this note is never going to pull up. Was sure hoping to read finish it out with that Psalm 50. Oh my goodness. Come on, it's not that big of a note. What are we at here? Oh, almost an hour. Dang it. Didn't want this teaching to be that long. Oh well. Oh my gosh. Is it? Man, I could just read it off of my phone by now. Let me see if I can pull it up. These computers is being retarded. Oh, of course. Finally, as I finally get it to pull up a little, it does pull up on the computer. Going super slow though. There it is. I reprove you for your sacrifice, and your burnt offerings are continually before me. I do not take a bull from your house, nor a goat out of your pens, for every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the mountains, and all moving in my field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not speak to you, for the world is mine, and all that fills it. Do I eat the flesh of bulls, or drink the blood of goats? Offer thanksgiving to Elohim, and pay your vows to the Most High. Thanks for stopping by, guys. You know, if you stuck around this long, let me talk to you a little bit more about what's coming up on this channel. One of the other things I've been studying for the past 3 years is the mud flood and Tartaria, and how our history has really been dinked with, and they've hidden a lot of our history from us. So once I get through these doctrinal changes and get everyone on board with you know, not killing and eating, then there are some very other interesting things that I'd like to start to talk about on this channel as well. So, but we can get into that next time. Thanks for stopping by, guys. Hope you have a blessed festival of unleavened bread, and I'll see you next time.